Good morning, students. Now we move on to the next type of questions in the text, which is working with the text. For the first question, we have for how long do you think Connie had kept Jim's letter? Give reasons for your answer. So, as we know, she received the letter probably after 1914, December 26, 1914 was the date on which the letter was written, and she must have gotten it about 20-30 days later, whatever, whenever, how much ever time it took to deliver the letter. And she had that letter since that day, and she said she used to read that every day. So it must, we don't know exactly how many years she kept the letter, but it was a very long time since she had the letter. Okay, so Connie must have kept Jim's letter for a long time. This is because she told the narrator that she had been reading that letter every single day so that she could feel that Jim, her husband, was near her and he is about to come back. Next question. Why do you think the desk had been sold and when? So as we know, the desk had a very precious thing for Mrs. McPherson, and still the desk was lying in a junk shop. Why was it sold? As we know that Mrs. McPherson did not use electricity; she used candles. So one day, probably because of those candles, her house caught fire and everything in the house got burnt. So that is why after that burning of the house she shifted to a nursing home, and then that is why everything inside the house had to be sold out because it was now useless and burnt out. So the desk must have been sold when the house in which Connie McPherson lived had caught fire. She was taken to a nursing home. All the burnt up things must have been sold by the neighbors or anyone else after that. We can write here neighbors. Next question. Why do Jim and Hans think that games and sports are a good way of resolving conflicts? Do you agree? So as we talked about while we were reading the chapter, that both the soldiers of German side and the British side decided, and especially the conversation between Hans and Jim McPherson, that they should resolve this war with a sport and with a game of football. And then we also know that Jim McPherson joked about it being a sport of cricket where Britishers will be able to win over the Germans. So they say this because they don't like war. Nobody likes war, nobody likes dying in war. But in sports, nobody dies. In sports, you can have a competition, you can have a resolution to a solution without people getting killed or wives getting widowed or children getting orphaned. So Jim and Hans thought that games or sports are a good way of resolving conflicts because nobody dies in matches, no children are orphaned, and no wives become widows. Due to these reasons, games are a good way of resolving conflicts. Wars only lead to death and devastation. Next question. Do you think the soldiers of the two armies are like each other or different from each other? Find evidence from the story to support your answer. So do you think the soldiers are similar to each other? Obviously they are similar because all of them are human beings. Although let's say people in India might look different to people in America or people in Britain or people in Germany or people in South India. Okay, people of North India look different. People of Northeast India look different from people of North India and South India. Although we might look different, although everybody looks different, but the thing is that all of us are human beings at the end of the day. We all feel the same emotions. We all feel that some things are good and some things are bad. Just like all stealing is bad and violence is bad in America as well as in India, right? Helping other people is a good habit in India as well as in America. So the soldiers of the German side and the British side are also human beings, okay, and they also don't like fighting because they will be losing their own lives. So one of the first thing that we know is that their common ground is that they don't like fighting in this war. How do we know that? With certain things that we got to know about them while they were celebrating on Christmas Day. So the soldiers of the two armies are like each other. Both the troops celebrated Christmas with each other. They shared each other's food. All of them were smoking, laughing, talking, drinking, and eating. So there were no soldiers on either side who did not like doing all this, because human beings like doing this thing. They even talked about books they liked. They agreed about everything. They also played a game of football for which both Hans and Jim cheered, clapped their hands, and stamped feet. They also exchanged carols at night. Moreover, they had the same view that wars only brought death and destruction, and they hoped that each would be alive to see his family. All these instances show that soldiers of the two armies were similar to each other. Mention the various ways in which the British and the German soldiers became friends and find things in common at Christmas. Same question, same things we'll write. The instances that we read in the letter Jim McPherson had written, that what all things they liked doing on Christmas Day. The British and German soldiers were celebrating with each other. All of them were smoking, talking, and Hans and Jim McPherson shared the cake Jim's wife Connie had baked, and they talked about Bathsheba, Gabriel Oak, Sergeant Troy, and Dorset. Dorset is the place where Jim McPherson was from. They talked about books they liked. Which was the book again? Remember that book? Name of the book: Far from the Maddening Crowd by Thomas Hardy. They talked about English books, because Hans Wolf's favorite book was Far from the Maddening Crowd. They agreed about everything. They did not disagree about anything, and yet they were fighting with each other. So Jim had said this in the conversation that we were making, conversation or the letter to Connie, that we were making peace while in wartime. Both the troops played football. Jim and Hans both cheered and clapped and stamped their feet because it was cold, and also because they were enjoying the game. They also exchanged carols at night. So these all things they did. So we'll number them now. So number 1, all of them were smoking, laughing, drinking. Hans Wolf and these people ate cake that they had baked. They talked about books they liked. They agreed about on anything. Both the troops played football, stamped their feet and clapped their hands, and they also exchanged carols at night. So all these 5 things tell us how these people were very similar, and they had many things in common. What is Connie's Christmas present? Why is it the best Christmas present in the world? It's a very important question, because the chapter is titled "The Best Christmas Present in the World." So when the narrator came to see Connie and gave her the box, she mistook him for her husband Jim. So she thought that it is Jim who had come back. She thought that Jim had come back home for Christmas. This was Connie's Christmas present. Now she was thinking that Jim, her husband, had surprised her with this Christmas present of coming back. It was the best Christmas present in the world for her, because Jim had written in the letter that he would come home on Christmas. She had read the letter several times every day to feel that he was near her. Now that he was finally there with her, she was extremely happy. So that is why it was the best Christmas present in the world for her. Now we talk about the title of the story. Do you think the title of the story is suitable for it? Can you think of any other title? So yes, of course, the title is one of the most apt title, which is describing the most important event, especially Christmas Eve, because most of the things that happened with Jim McPherson and the German soldiers and other British soldiers was on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve is basically this 25th of December. We call that Christmas Eve. And then the author also went to Connie McPherson on Christmas Eve. So both the important events in the story are happening on Christmas Day. So one of the most important things was that when author came back to give the tin box, she thought that it was Jim who had come back, her husband who had come back, and it was a present for her. That is why it is titled The Best Christmas Present in the World. So the spirit of Christmas theme prevails throughout the story. It was on a Christmas day in the middle of a war that the two sides were making peace with each other. The moment of peace that the soldiers shared with each other was the best Christmas present for them. So the soldiers were fighting in a war and they couldn't have enjoyed the Christmas better than with their enemies. So even with the enemies, they were enjoying. So it was one of the best Christmas they would ever have. And Jim McPherson also admitted to this fact that he will remember this Christmas forever in his life. And again, in the third part, we have on Christmas Day, the narrator went to see Mrs. McPherson. He went to return the letter, and the letter was very precious to her. But even more precious was she thinking. It was a delusion. Delusion is not a reality. Delusion is our thinking. Whatever wrong things we think is a delusion. But for her, her delusion was that she is thinking that her husband is back from the war and it is a Christmas present for her. That narrator was her husband Jim, who had believed had returned as a promise on a Christmas day, and this was the best Christmas present for her. So, do you have any other title? If you have any other title that you want to give to the story, you have to let me know. Write it in the group. Any other apt title that you think you can give to this story, and write all these questions. The PDF, I will give you the PDF in your notebook, and write all these questions in the notebook, and then listen to the audio that I will send you of a very short poem, a very nice poem, and we'll talk about that poem tomorrow.